Hello everyone and welcome back to another video, and another book video at that. How exciting. I have been meaning to do this tag for the past couple of years on and off, but every time I remember that it's a thing, it's too late into the year. Or I think of it in like April and then never again until about August. And yes, this is going up in July, which arguably is after the midway point, but we're not going to talk about that. I just really want to make this video, so I'm going to make this video. I know that there are multiple versions of this tag going around with varying amounts of questions, but I am using the questions that Jesse the Reader used in his video. I will link his video down below, and I'll also put the questions themselves in the description box below this video. Now, before we get started with the questions, I haven't read them fully, so I might be spoiling something, but I figured I'd let you know that I have read 15 books so far this year. The most recent one I finished about 2 days ago as of me filming this, so I finished that in July, but I will still use it for this video if I feel like it fits any of the prompts or any of the questions, even though I finished it after the halfway point or midway point. Let's go. So the first question is, what's the best book you have read so far this year? I'm going to pull up my story graph for this, and I'll also leave that link down below because I have problems sometimes remembering what I have read earlier in the year. So I'm going to just go back to the beginning and just scan what I read, because I have read a lot of good books this year. Like a lot of good books. I am gonna go with my most recent read, partly because it is the freshest in my mind, but also because I thoroughly enjoyed that book. And that is Wild Things by Laura Kay. It's my first Laura Kay book, and we follow this character named Eleanor, I believe. That's the thing I've already forgotten because of who I am as a person. But we follow this main character who is in love with her best friend, and the two of them and two of their friends buy a house in the countryside together and start sort of a commune, and they raise chickens and they get to know the neighbors and grow their own vegetables. And it just hit pretty close to home as a queer person living in a commune in the countryside. I just really thoroughly enjoyed it, and it was so good. It was so good. I did read the first 4 chapters a while ago, but it wasn't then quite what I wanted to read. Plus, I was really feeling rereading the Hunger Games because I had a lot of Hunger Games around me. Teresa was rereading them. I have found this YouTuber, who I can also link down below, who has been reading the books for the first time and watching the movies for the first time. And so I was just consuming a lot of Hunger Games related content, and I just wanted to reread the books because I read them for the first time back in, I don't know, 2013 maybe, and I believe I have reread them once since then, but not in a long time. I have seen the movies more recently, but not reread the books, and I'm not a huge rereader. There are certain books in my life that I have reread multiple times. Other than that, I just tend to read a book once and then kind of forget about it because of who I am as a person. But either way, I put this down to read the whole trilogy of the Hunger Games books, and then I went back to this and I just flew through it. I had a bus commute. I went to see a friend who lives a few hours away, and so it was like an hour and a half bus ride for the final leg of it, and I read 90 pages on the way to her and 80 pages on the way back. I was just so into this book. Loved it. Great. What's the most disappointing book you have read so far this year is the second question, and I can remember one book I have DNF'd. I think I've DNF'd another one, but I can't remember what that was. But the most disappointing book that I have read and DNF'd was Arthur and Teddy Are Coming Out by Ryan Love, which is about a granddad and a grandson and other family members as well, because there's a lot of intertwining and lots of family issues going on. But both these characters, the granddad and the grandson, are coming out to their families around the same time. And I really wanted to love this book. I don't remember how much of it I read. I want to say it was like 70 pages, maybe. I just did not like it. I couldn't get into it. I didn't feel for the characters. I didn't like the characters. And that's a real shame because I wanted to like it. And the cover is really pretty. But alas, I did not like it. Number 3 is, what is the best book recommendation you have received so far this year? Or received this year even? And have I been recommended any of these books? Well, I will say that I don't think I've been directly recommended any of these books by a friend, but there are books that I've read because I've seen them recommended around BookTube, for example. I read The Midnight Library back in April, maybe? It's part of this video, I can link it up here, which was a recommendation that I've seen people talk about. And I also want to mention Lessons in Chemistry as well, which I had heard a lot of things about. I can't remember exactly who had talked about it. I feel like more people had talked about The Midnight Library, but that has also been out for longer than Lessons in Chemistry has been out. And I read both of them actually in that video, and I enjoyed them both. They were really, really good. Question number 4 is, what was your first DNF of the year? And that is, like I mentioned before, Arthur and Teddy are coming out by Ryan Love. I don't have much more to say about it. Number 5 is a new release from this year that you've read and your thoughts on it, good or bad. And for this, I'm gonna pick Funny Story by Emily Henry. I have been on a real big Emily Henry binge in the last few months. I have now read all of her books, and I think I've read 3 or 4 of them this year. So I've read all of them that are out. And Funny Story came out in March or April. I read it this year. Thoroughly enjoyed it. I don't think it's my favorite Emily Henry book. I think that is still You and Me on Vacation, which I read after this, I believe. No, I read it before then. Either way, I really did enjoy Funny Story. It was such an interesting premise of someone dating their ex-fiance's new fiance's ex-boyfriend. Like, that is just a mindfuck in and of itself. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I am a big fan of Emily Henry's writing, and I'm really glad I enjoyed that book as well. Number 6 is a book that came out in the first half of the year that you want to read, and a book coming out in the second half of the year that you're anticipating. So for the book that came out in the first half, I'm going to say Plot Twist by Bria Keenan. I hope that's how you say your name. If it's not, I'm sorry. This sounds really good. It's 2 writer friends who go to the Irish countryside together, I believe, and chaos and madness ensues, and I think they fall in love at the end. And it just sounds really good. And funny story, not funny story, but funny story is that this book, I don't know who put it on my radar, but it was on my radar and has been on my radar. And Marcus and I went to Uppsala, which is a city here in Sweden, which is one of 3 cities that has a designated English bookshop. It's even called the English Bookshop. It exists in Uppsala, in Stockholm, and in Gothenburg. And possibly there's one in Malmö too, I'm not sure. Either way, we went there in March for our wedding anniversary, had a little weekend trip there, and we went to this bookstore, and on one of the tables right as you walked in was actually Wild Things by Laura Kay. But I picked that up thinking it was Plot Twist by Bria Keenan because the covers are so similar to me. Tell me in the comments if you disagree, but if you disagree, I'm sorry, you're wrong. They are so similar. And I literally picked up Wild Things and I was like, oh my god, it's out already? Because it wasn't going to come out until the end of May, and we were there sort of in the middle of May. And I thought maybe they'd accidentally put it out too early, or maybe I had the release date wrong. And I was just so excited, and I'm not even sure that I read the back of Wild Things. I feel like I must have, but I don't remember if I did or not. And then I came home and I was like, oh, that's actually not the book I thought it was. Ha! But either way, Plot Twist is one I'm really excited about that has already been released. Like I said, it was released sometime in March, and I'm just really excited to get it eventually. I'm currently trying to not buy books because I have bought a lot of books this year, and I have a lot of books that I want to and need to read. Not need to, but really want to. And as for a book that has not yet come out, I'm going to put The Pairing by Casey McQuiston. I have a little bit of an iffy, rocky relationship with Casey because I really, really, really love Red, White and Royal Blue. That is a book I think I've reread twice now, so I've read it 3 times all in all. I have a special edition of it. I really love it. Let's not talk about the filmatization of it or the TV show of it because that was not my cup of tea. But then I read One Last Stop by them and I did not really like it. I liked it, but I did not love it. And I've not read I Kissed Sarah Wheeler, something like that. The Pairing, however, does sound really interesting, and I really, really hope I will get to it eventually and like it and hopefully even love it. But as with Plot Twist, I am not currently buying books. I keep telling myself I'm not currently buying books. So They will both have to wait for a bit, and I will have to wait for a bit to read them. But I believe that the pairing comes out August 6th or something like that, so it's coming up pretty soon. Maybe by then I am buying books. Who knows? Book number 7 is what's the most beautiful book you've added to your collection, or a beautiful book you'd like to own? I am not really a collector of pretty editions. The only exception, I guess, is my special edition of Red, White and Royal Blue, because I got that specifically because it was pretty and I wanted the bonus content while I already have the original book, you know? There was something that came across my feed that I really liked the special edition of. I will say that Happy Place by Emily Henry, which came out last year, I do own, and I have the Waterstones exclusive edition of that because I got it when I was in Scotland. It was around release time, and it has spray painted edges that match the cover a bit. But then I found out the other day that I think it's Germany that does special editions, like really special editions of a lot of books. I can't pinpoint a certain book, like, oh, I want to own Funny Story like that, or I want to own, I don't know, The Great Gatsby like that. There are some really pretty editions, but again, I'm not usually one to collect them just because they're pretty, with, like I said, the one exception, and I guess also my Jane Austen bind up, even though I have all of the Jane Austen books individually, but that bind up was a gift, so different, maybe. The next question is, what genre have you read the most of this year? So let's head back to Storygraph, and I'm gonna grab a screenshot for you to put on the screen right now. My most read genre, which does not surprise me, is romance with 7 books, closely followed by contemporary at 6 books. And then there's a jump to science fiction with 4 books. And I looked at this earlier and I was like, how have I read 4 sci-fi books? I can't remember a single sci-fi book that I read. And then I went to the sci-fi bar to see which books it was. And it was Murderbot, which makes sense. And then it's the entire Hunger Games trilogy, which I personally would not call sci-fi. But I guess maybe they fall under sci-fi because there are the holograms and there are you know, the arena is so meticulously planned with computers. I don't know. I wouldn't spontaneously have called it sci-fi, but I guess I'm wrong. Question 9 is, do you feel your reading tastes have changed or shifted at all this year? A new genre you love, a new favorite trope, or a new favorite theme? I don't know. I don't really feel like I've been stepping far outside of my comfort zone. Again, Murderbot was a new thing for me, but that's still something I've been excited about and intrigued by for a while, and didn't feel like super out there and scary or anything. I haven't read any horror, I haven't read any, you know, those things. Horror, I guess, is the genre that scares me. Yeah, no, I don't really think so. As for themes, it's not really something I actively look for, I guess. I can't even think of what a theme would be. Found family is a theme, but it's also a trope, isn't it? When it comes to tropes, there is one new trope that I have read this year that I wasn't surprised that I liked because it's something I've been wanting to read for a while. But I read 3 Swedish Mountain Men by Lily Gold, which is a reverse harem or a why choose romance, which, just side note, on the cover is actually just written a why choose romance. Which sounds like, why choose romance? Why not choose crime? You know? Either way, I really enjoyed that. It was a book that really surprised me, which I thought was a question on here, but it isn't in this version of the tag, so I'm just going to talk about it anyway. It's a book that I thought was going to be just a fun time, really. I didn't expect there to be much substance to it. And despite that, I found myself a few times going, this is too much plot. I don't want the plot. I'm not reading this for the plot. And I found myself a few times going, that's not how snow works. That's not medically accurate. Because as someone who works in medicine, although not with the actual touching people medicine thing, and who lives in a cold climate where we get lots of snow, those were just things that stood out to me. I remember there was a scene in the book, or a part of the book, where I think it was like negative 20 degrees Celsius or something. It was really freaking cold, and they were having a snowball fight. Snow at negative 20 does not make snowballs. Snow around 0 degrees Celsius, that makes snowballs quite well, but no. So things like that, I I wasn't bothered by because it was funny, but yeah, I noticed that and I reacted to it and it took me out of the story a little bit. And then also sometimes there was just too much plot. I didn't read it for the plot, you know, I read it for the other stuff. And there is one more Lily Gold book that I'm interested in reading, which is Faking with Benefits, I think is the name. She has 2 more out, one of which is called Nanny for the Neighbors, and there is a surprise baby, which I don't like. And the other one is called The Double Duty Bodyguards, or Bodyguards, I believe, which deals with some like post-war PTSD and stuff. They're all still white shoes romance, they're all still reverse harems, but the tropes in those, or like the premise for those, don't interest me. Question 10 is, if you set any bookish/content goals for yourself this year, how are they going? Well, I did the same thing this year that I did last year, and maybe also in 22. I don't remember 2022. I do, but I don't remember what goal I set for that year. But my goal for this year, like at least last year, was 1 book. To read just the 1 book. And so with my 15 books read at this point, Storygraph is so proud of me. It says, fantastic, you're exceeding your reading goal by 14 books. Which, thanks. Be proud of me. I really realized that that really helps for me to have such a low goal. I still want to have a goal because I still want the stats that the app gives me, which maybe would even if I didn't set a goal, but here we are. I'm going to set the 1 book goal, and my plan is to do the same in 2025 as well. However, there are other things, other sort of short-term goals, but also long-term goals that I would like to do. For example, I did make that video of swapping my screen time for reading time, which was an experiment, and while I didn't have a swapping my screen time for reading time to read 10 books in a week plan, good, because probably not doable depending on book length and life in general, but I would still like to do some other challenges. I have one coming up that I'll mention in a second once I've finished this talking point. But I have so many books on my TBR behind you right now that I would like to read, and I would like to read before I acquire more books, unless I find something really, really special. Like if I find a real good non-fiction, I'm still picking those up. For example, I bought one on slow fashion in November, so that was last year, but I bought that because it was just a really interesting topic to me, and I have really enjoyed reading non-fiction in recent years. But I have so many books I want to read before I acquire new books, and several of them are series. Like for example, I have the entirety of the Lunar Chronicles series, which I've read the first book and then I read most of the second book years ago, and so I want to sit down and reread the first book and the second book and then complete with the third and fourth. I don't have the novellas, that's fine by me. And same with the Scythe trilogy. I have read the first one, I have book 2 and 3, and I don't have the novella thing as well. And I was a little bit like, oh, should I get Gleanings before I read them so I can read them all as a whole? But as I've understood, it's not actually part of the series as such. Like the trilogy is a standalone trilogy, if there is such a thing, and that just gives a little bit more information and sprinkles some things in that can be read separately. So I think that would still be fine. My thing with reading series is if I read the books too far spaced out, if I don't read them close in time, I forget what happens in the previous book. And that's why I want to reread Scythe to read the next 2, and why I want to reread Cinder before I read the other ones. But I do think and I do hope that if I do read the Scythe trilogy, and then down the line sometime when I pick up Gleaning? Whatever the title is, that I can read that as a sort of standalone then, without feeling the need to reread the series unless I want to reread the series. I did intend to read The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes around the time I read The Hunger Games this time around, but once I was done with the last book of that, I just wanted to get back to something soft and fluffy and gay. It's still on my list, it's still on my shelf, I'll get to it eventually, and now I feel well enough caught up with the Hunger Games trilogy that I could jump back into that world. I do feel like The Ballads of Songbirds and Snakes is a little bit different because it is a prequel. The Gleanings is sort of a sequel, but not really. I don't know. My point being that I like to read things that belong together, close in time together, and I have some rereads to do before I can tackle parts of my TBR. I want to reread Scythe before I read the next 2 books. Once I've read those, 2 books come off my shelf, but I have read 3 books. Same with the Lunar Chronicles. But the point I was going to make about 5 minutes ago, when I was going to finish that tangent I just went on, is that in recent weeks, in the last month or so, I have acquired the entirety of Fredrik Backman's books. So I'm really excited to get to them. I have read a couple of them before. I have read A Man Called Ove. I have read Things My Son Need to Know About the World. And I think I have read Britt-Marie Was Here as well before. But now, through like pure luck second-handing, I have acquired all of his books, including the Beartown series. I have them all in Swedish, so names, I know it's called Beartown, but like some of my title translations might be slightly off from what they ended up being called in English. Either way, I now have all of his books, including the 2 novellas, and I'm really excited to get to those. And I was thinking if I was going to do one big Fredrik Backman month, I don't know, a video or 2, I don't know, but I also don't know how interesting it would be for you, for me, to make a video in English about books I'm reading in Swedish, and I'm not sure how well it would translate, I guess. I have read Swedish books before, and I think I've talked about them on this channel, but doing a whole video on me reading books in Swedish, which have been translated, but I'm reading the Swedish version, and therefore might have a hard time talking about them coherently. I don't know. Let me know if you think that would be fun, but I'm really excited to get to his backlog or his books, and there are 10 of them, including the novellas. So yeah, that would take 10 books off my TBR, which would be great. I do expect I would be crying a lot though, because I know I wept when I read Things My Son Needs to Know About the World. I did this thing back in 2015 or 2016 with that book, that I recorded myself reading it and I sent the clips and eventually also the book to my friend Theo, who for so many years I have called my son and he calls me padre. Doesn't really make sense, but it does to us. And I remember just sobbing for parts of that book. I don't remember where, but I sobbed for that. I sobbed when I read A Man Called Ove towards the end. I don't remember if I cried with Britt-Marie. And then I also know that the trilogy of Beartown is not the happiest story. And I also know that the novellas are sad. So, in for a great time. The book that I am most excited about from his whole catalogue, though, is People with Anxiety, or Anxious People, is how that's been translated. I think that's going to be a wild time, and I'm excited about it. Hi. Editing me just jumping in here to tell you that the cover for the Swedish edition of the book, which is called Folk med ångest, translated directly to People with Anxiety, versus the English cover, they're so different. Like, there are differences between the other Swedish and English covers as well, obviously, but I'm gonna turn the phone back around. That is the cover for the Swedish one. It has, you can see someone in a bunny costume in the bathroom and someone holding a gun outside. And then I'm just going to pull up this little tab here and show you the English covers. They don't feature the bunny at all, or the bathroom. I don't know, I just thought it was funny because they're so extremely different. But yes, let me know if you want a video on that, on his whole catalogue, I suppose. And also if you have a preference in which order I read them, because I kind of want to jump into the ones I'm most excited about first, while also obviously not breaking up the trilogy. And I don't know if I should read them in publication order plus trilogy, you know, condensed into one. I don't know if there are books released interspersed with those, or if I should just pick and choose my own order. Let me know. And the final question is, finally, a book you've read so far this year that you feel embodies the vibe of your reading year. Well, like I said, I've had a really good reading year. I don't know if I said that, but I have had a really good reading year. And I don't know if I can pinpoint a single book. I don't know how to really interpret that question. A book that embodies the vibe of my reading year. I've had a good one, so I should pick a good book, shouldn't I? I'm gonna be funny, and I'm gonna pick Book Lovers by Emily Henry, because I have loved books. My camera ran out of storage space right as I wrapped that up, so I'm going to wrap the video up here on my phone instead. That is all I have for this video. I would love to hear down below what some of your favourite reads of this year were, if you want to answer any of the questions, if you want to completely ignore the questions. Any and all of that is good. And yeah, let me know again about the Fredrik Backman series thing. It's not a series, but it could be a series, like his books are not a series apart from the trilogy. Either way, let me know if that's something that sounds interesting to you at all. If you've read his books, if you haven't read his books. I'll be back with another video at some point, and I hope to see you then. Bye!